Cher, the immortal goddess of reinvention, the phoenix of pop who has refused to be erased for nearly 7 decades. From a child abandoned in an orphanage with torn shoes held together only by rubber bands, she rose to command an empire worth more than $360 million? No one else in the industry has endured like her. The woman who defied time itself, turning poverty into platinum, heartbreak into history, and illness into legacy. She gave us, "I got you, babe," and the world believed for the first time. She gave us believe, and the world has never stopped believing. Her fortune is staggering. More than 100 million records sold worldwide. A long-running Las Vegas residency grossing over $250 million. Along with tours that shattered records but also left her knees so swollen she needed injections backstage just to go on. She owns an Italian Renaissance-inspired mansion in Malibu, perched dramatically above the Pacific, worth tens of millions of dollars? With massive bronze doors, cool marble floors, and windows opening onto endless ocean views where every sunset whispers of a life that refused to surrender. Scattered across Beverly Hills are more multi-million-dollar estates, each one like a chapter etched into the book of her reinvention. Her garage houses a fleet of luxury, Rolls-Royces gleaming under the lights, a Porsche 911 roaring like a heart that never stopped burning, a Cadillac Escalade quietly carrying moments of triumph and sorrow through the years. But this story is not about wealth. It is about the cost of it. Because every dollar in that empire carries a scar. Every estate, every car, is a silent witness to the nights she stood on stage with trembling legs. To every note sung while her chest felt like it was collapsing under illness. Behind the dazzling fireworks were nights she collapsed from exhaustion backstage, gowns glittering only to hide bruises. Behind the cheers were long, silent hours where she gasped for breath, battling her own body so as not to fail her audience. And now, as her family stands before that towering legacy, they do not see assets, they see the woman behind it all. A mother who wrapped all her love in sacrifice, an artist who poured blood and tears into every song, a flesh-and-blood human being who fell many times but always chose to rise. If her music ever carried you through pain, consider leaving a tribute below, because even a single like is a whispered thank you for the voice that lifted us when we could not stand on our own. Cher's earliest memories were not lullabies or tender embraces, but the weight of poverty pressing against her ribs, the silence of nights without comfort, and the gnawing fear that she would never belong to anyone or anywhere. Born on May 20th, 1946, in El Centro, California, she entered a world already cracked at its foundation. Her mother, Georgia Holt, sang with the heart of a dreamer, yet stood behind a donut counter in Fresno to survive. While her father, John Sarkeesian, an Armenian-American truck driver with charm but no roots, vanished almost as quickly as he appeared. Their impulsive marriage disintegrated before Cher could form her first words, leaving her with fragments instead of family. A surname that slipped away, a father who became a ghost, and a childhood stained by instability. Georgia's life became a desperate carousel of husbands, 7 in all, some twice repeated, each man carrying promises that crumbled into dust. In those restless years, Cher was not an only child. She had an older half-sister, Jorgan, who shared the same mother but not the same father, and together they became reluctant witnesses to their mother's search for permanence, yet permanence never came. At just 2 years old, in a moment of despair no child should endure, Georgia left Cher in the care of a Catholic orphanage. It was not cruelty, but necessity. Yet the image remains haunting, a toddler with wide, questioning eyes clutching at strangers' hands while her mother walked away. Her life unfolded like a film soaked in shadows. She bounced between her grandparents' modest house, rented rooms that smelled of dust, and shelters where nothing belonged to her. She remembered nights huddled under thin blankets, the winter air slipping through cracks in the walls, and the shame of wearing clothes so tattered they drew whispers at school. once tying rubber bands around the soles of her ruined shoes just to make it through another day. The whiplash of her life was almost cruel. One week surviving on canned beans, the next briefly dropped into Beverly Hills, where her mother chased opportunity with yet another husband. These contrasts did not dazzle. They carved wounds of confusion into her identity. She was not only poor, she was invisible. In classrooms, her struggle with dyslexia and an undiagnosed learning disorder marked her as lazy. Teachers mistook her silence for defiance, and report cards became accusations. While other girls planned dances and dreamed of dresses, Cher was already daydreaming of rhinestones and spotlights, imagining that on stage she would no longer be the unwanted child, but someone the world could not ignore. By 16, that hunger for escape burned hotter than her shame. She dropped out of school, packed a small suitcase filled with nothing but clothes and impossible dreams, and boarded a bus to Los Angeles. The city in the early 1960s was littered with broken promises, but it offered her one fragile lifeline. Sonny Bono? He was not yet her lover, but a man who gave her a couch when she had nowhere else to sleep. What began as convenience became survival, then partnership, and finally a force that defied the odds. In 1965, their voices twined together in "I Got You, Babe," and the world finally listened. The song did more than launch a career. It pulled Cher from the abyss of invisibility, the dark pit of being forgotten. But fame is fickle. Early hits faded, their films flopped, and the spotlight cooled. To survive, they pivoted to smoky Las Vegas stages, where sequins glimmered beneath cheap neon and the air was thick with the scent of survival rather than glamour. Night after night, Cher sang not for applause, but to keep herself from disappearing. Her voice carried the ache of a child left in an orphanage, the fear of shoes falling apart, and the endless hunger for permanence. And though no one in the audience knew it, every note was a brick laid in the empire she would one day build. Not an empire born of privilege, but one forged out of wounds, abandonment, and a hunger so deep it could only be answered by creating a life no one could ever take away. When fame began to fade in the late 1960s and the charts no longer sang their names, Cher, barely in her 20s, and Sonny faced a brutal truth. They were running out of time, out of money, and out of momentum. What once felt like destiny now trembled on the edge of decline. In a move born not of glamour but of sheer survival, they reinvented themselves as a nightclub act in Las Vegas. It was no dazzling reinvention, it was a fragile lifeline. Beneath smoky stage lights with the sour scent of spilled cocktails and the heavy air of fading relevance pressing down on them, they rebuilt from scraps, no longer chart toppers, but entertainers. Quick banter, sharp comedy, and undeniable chemistry became their currency, and at the center was Cher. Her dry wit cutting through the haze, her stage presence so electric that no spotlight could dim it. From that desperation, ironically, came rebirth. By 1971, the Sonny and Cher comedy hour arrived on television, beaming into millions of homes. For audiences, it was a glittering revival. For Cher, just 25, it was proof that survival could sometimes masquerade as triumph. Yet behind the laughter, their world was unraveling. Their marriage, already fraying, was held together not by love but by legacy. They smiled for the cameras while silence poisoned their home. Cher would later confess the suffocating agony of pretending happiness while her heart caved inward. Even Sonny admitted in a private 1973 journal that their romantic facade was the only glue keeping their empire from shattering. By 1974, that glue dissolved. Cher filed for divorce, and in 1975 both their marriage and their professional bond collapsed. What followed was devastation. Cher, who had trusted Sonny not just with her heart but with their finances, walked away nearly penniless. At 29, she grieved the end of her first great love while staring into the abyss of financial ruin. She had been the face, the voice, the fire, and yet she exited with almost nothing but her name. It was a cruel twist of fate. And still, she refused to disappear. With little more than courage, she launched her own show in 1975, simply titled Cher. Whispers in the industry predicted she would fail without Sonny. Instead, she triumphed. Sequins sparkled, laughter roared, and the show became a hit, a defiant declaration that she was never just someone's half. Meanwhile, Sonny's own solo project collapsed within a single season, a symbolic rupture that marked the painful end of their once unified stardom. But the road ahead was merciless. Her solo albums, Stars in 1975, I'd Rather Believe in You in 1976, and Cherished in 1977, sank into silence. The voice that had once enthralled millions suddenly seemed unwanted. Critics muttered that her time had passed. The industry began to look elsewhere, and for the first time, Cher was no longer the center of attention, but a fading echo of a former era. And yet, she refused to accept erasure. She returned to the stage, to television, to anything that would keep her visible. Each appearance was not just performance, it was resistance. Each laugh, each note, each costume change became proof that she could still command attention even when the world had begun to turn away. She was no longer just rebuilding a career, she was fighting for identity, for relevance, for the right to exist in an industry that had already decided to move on. And through that relentless reinvention, she did what she had always done: survive, adapt, and refuse to disappear. And then, from the wreckage of love and career, came another storm. Gregg Allman entered her life, a Southern rock legend haunted by demons of his own. In June 1975, just 3 days after her divorce was finalized, Cher married him, in what felt like a desperate gamble on hope. Within 9 days, the marriage collapsed under the weight of his addictions, his chaos clashing with her hunger for control and reinvention. Yet, she stayed. She forgave. They reconciled. They fought. They tried to stitch together a life from broken seams. When Cher briefly reunited with Sonny in 1976, Gregg filed for divorce, until fate intervened. That summer, Cher discovered she was pregnant. Their son, Elijah Blue, born in July 1976, became a fragile thread of meaning binding them together. But even a child could not quiet the storms. By 1978, the marriage ended for good. Years later, Cher would speak sparingly of that chapter, her words heavy with wounds too private to bear. "It was deep," she whispered, "but it was hard." By the time she was 32, she had endured 2 divorces, the collapse of her professional empire and the humiliation of near bankruptcy. And yet, she did not yield. Through every betrayal, every silence, every collapse, she carried sorrow like armor and turned grief into resilience. In the late 1970s, when disco glitter blinded the charts and rock anthems shook stadiums, Cher, barely past 30, stood once more on the cliff's edge of erasure. The girl who once tied rubber bands around her broken shoes to hide the holes now faced a crueler humiliation, a career slipping into silence. The industry had moved on. The radio no longer played her songs. She was a woman with fame behind her but no fortune ahead, staring into the abyss of being forgotten. And yet, Cher had never been built for surrender. She did what survival had taught her since childhood. She gambled. Signing with Casablanca Records in 1978, she stepped into a world ruled by mirror balls and bass lines. Even though her soul still longed for the grit of rock, for Cher, disco wasn't just music. It was compromise. It was risk. It was reinvention wrapped in sequins. Out of that gamble came Take Me Home in 1979, its title track shimmering with sensual defiance. The album sold over 500,000 copies in the US alone and earned her a certified gold record, a lifeline worth hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time when her accounts were nearly empty. But beneath the glitter was a woman clawing her way back into relevance, turning scars into spectacle, reminding the world that she had never truly left. Emboldened, she reached further with Prisoner later that year, hoping to fuse disco's heat with her own raw honesty. The industry, however, was merciless. The record collapsed, caught between commerce and truth. Critics sneered, sales plummeted, and once again, Cher was forced to taste the bitterness of failure. Yet, she refused retreat. By 1980, she stripped away sequins and costumes, birthing Black Rose, a rock band with guitarist Les Dudek. For the first time in decades, she wasn't Cher the brand, she was Cher the bandmate, standing shoulder to shoulder in sweat-soaked clubs, chasing authenticity over applause. But fate's cruelty struck again. The album bore no name, no signal of her star power. Fans missed it, radio ignored it, and by 1982, the music faded, the band dissolved, and the romance collapsed into silence. Another reinvention had withered, and with it, another source of income slipped through her hands. Most would have stopped there. Cher did not. Written off as a relic of another era, she refused to accept that ending. She stood in the wreckage of yet another failure, with no clear path forward, and chose to begin again anyway. At 36, written off as a relic of another era, she chose the most terrifying road of all. She started over from nothing. Acting wasn't vanity, it was survival. In 1983, in Silkwood, she disappeared into Dolly Pellicer, a quiet, wounded woman living on society's edges. There was no glamour, no sequins, only truth. The film earned over $35 million at the box office. Her performance earned a Golden Globe and her first Oscar nomination. Suddenly, studios began writing checks with her name on them again. For the first time in years, money and respect were arriving together. Roles in Mask, 1985, The Witches of Eastwick, 1987, and Suspect, 1987 followed, each bringing six-figure paychecks and adding new weight to her name. Her empire soared beyond music. Perfumes, fashion lines, and global tours stretching across decades of reinvention. Her net worth climbed into the hundreds of millions, a testament not just to longevity, but to relentless survival in an industry that forgets quickly. She returned to music with the same defiance that had carried her through every collapse, and in 1998, Believe did more than top charts, it rewrote them. The song sold over 10 million copies worldwide, its sound revolutionary, its success undeniable, proving that even after decades, she could still dominate a new era. Las Vegas became her kingdom, residencies that grossed hundreds of millions, nights where thousands gathered not just to hear her sing, but to witness endurance itself. Tours shattered records across continents, her name once again echoing through arenas, carried by generations who refused to let her fade. She was no longer just a performer. She was a symbol, a living contradiction of time itself, an artist who had fallen, rebuilt, and risen so many times that the industry could no longer define her limits. Yet behind the spectacle, the cost was mounting. Knees swollen, body worn, injections taken backstage just to stand under the lights. Tours shattered records. But each performance carved something out of her physically, each night demanding more than her body could quietly endure. There were nights she collapsed from exhaustion behind the curtain, gowns still glittering while her body struggled to keep up with the legend the world demanded. Behind the cheers were long, silent hours where she gasped for breath, battling her own body so as not to fail her audience. Her homes, her cars, her fortune, they told one story. But her body told another? One of pain endured in silence, of illness fought in private, of a woman pushing beyond limits so the audience would never see her break. Because for Cher, greatness was never free. Every achievement carried a cost, every standing ovation echoed with the weight of sacrifice, and every note she sang was paid for with something the world would never fully understand. And now, as her family stands before that towering legacy, they do not see assets, they see the woman behind it all. A mother who wrapped all her love in sacrifice, an artist who poured blood and tears into every song, a flesh and blood human being who fell many times but always chose to rise. Because what she built is more than an empire, it is a testament to endurance, to reinvention, to a life that refused to disappear no matter how many times it was pushed to the edge. The world will remember the hits, the glamour, the decades of dominance. But beneath all of it was a woman who paid for every second of that legacy with something deeply personal. She was not just a voice, she was a bridge, from poverty to power, from abandonment to adoration, from silence to a stage that never truly let her rest. And even now, behind the lights and the applause, there remains the same child who once felt invisible, still fighting, still proving that she belongs. If her music has ever carried you through your darkest moments, consider leaving a tribute below, because even the smallest gesture is a quiet acknowledgement of a life that gave everything so others could feel something real.